The holiday season is coming up, so it feels like the best time to tell this story. I'm a college student, and the holidays are one of the most exciting times of the year for me. I get to go home to see my family, but most importantly, eat good food. I go to a small state school in the Pacific Northwest, and my town has an airport in it, but with almost zero flights leaving after 6 a.m. So that would mean I'd have to drive about an hour or so to reach the next town over, with a bigger airport with more flight options. My girlfriend and I had just begun dating at the time, and we had been together for maybe about 4 months. I thought it would be the nice thing to do, as well as maybe the smarter thing, and I offered to drive both of us to the airport that following weekend after finals. I figured that we would save on gas and it's better for the planet. My flight was at 9 a.m. and hers was at 10. So if we left early enough, we'd both have time before our flights to sit and have breakfast together. She slept over at my place the night before, and we got up early the next morning to start driving. Before we left, I checked the weather for the drive, and it was supposed to be foggy and rainy in some parts. Not too bad, considering the time of the year it was, and I thought it would be no big deal. So I warmed up the car and packed our suitcases into it while she was getting ready in the bathroom and making us coffee. We ended up leaving at around 6 a.m. while it was still pitch black out. The first half hour of the drive went normal. We listened to music and chatted about our plans for the break. Then came the windy farm roads that we had to drive through. You see, I've driven these roads dozens of times before to get to the airport and to other places nearby as well, so I had zero reason to be concerned about heading through here. But there was a dense layer of fog that must have stretched for at least a few miles by the look of it. I couldn't really see much, even with my fog lights on, even with me doing my best grandpa impression and pushing my seat closer to the steering wheel. In the distance, I saw lights blinking. I thought maybe it was a cop trying to get people to slow down through the fog. As I got closer though, I noticed that it was just normal hazard lights from this dark green pickup truck that was parked almost diagonally across the road. It was a 2-lane road, so I didn't have much space to maneuver. Looking at the truck, it looked fine. No external damage I could see at least. I was about 200 feet away from the truck now, trying to just make sense of what could have happened, when for the briefest moment I noticed a shadow behind the truck. At first, I thought it was just the shadow of the exhaust or something, but it slowly came to my realization that it was a person behind the truck, but not standing, nor trying to get our attention for help or anything. They were just kind of sitting there, or kneeling maybe. I've jumped people's cars on the side of the road before. I'm not necessarily afraid of helping someone out, but in this situation, with the weather and my girlfriend in the car, I was worried. My girlfriend nervously whispered my name and tapped my hand, which was on the gear shift, about ready to throw it into reverse and get out. She whispered to me that she saw another shadow, standing about 100 feet off the shoulder of the road. I looked over and confirmed to myself that it was definitely another shadow of a person. I was starting to think that something wasn't right. Neither of them were moving, and one was still behind the truck. I threw my car into reverse, and the more I backed up, the more my lights illuminated the scene. There was a person standing closer than I had originally thought off the shoulder, and he was holding what looked like this long serrated knife. Then the seriousness of what was happening came into full view. The shadow attempted to walk closer, but I threw the car in gear and I drove half off the road to get around the truck. I must have been going at least 60 miles per hour down this farm road without being able to see much ahead of me at all. When I felt like we had gotten far enough away, I pulled us over and called the police. I didn't really know what to report. I just knew that something couldn't have been right with that. My girlfriend was in hysterics and I was trying to calm her down. We spent maybe 20 minutes on the side of the road just trying to make sense of it. We eventually reached the airport and boarded our respective flights and went home. When I got home, I checked the news for that area. Apparently, this man was driving down the road when he picked up a hitchhiker and was killed. I got a call from the police department later that day to try to get a description of the man that I saw, but all I could tell them was that he had a knife in his hand and that he was wearing blue jeans and work boots. Not much help, I know. I made it back to town the following month and drove myself and my girlfriend back to campus. After that event though, I never book my flights that early in the morning, and I always try to finish whatever driving I have to do before dark. The thoughts of what could have happened to me or my girlfriend that night still haunt me sometimes, and I have problems sleeping because of it. It's a topic we haven't brought up with each other since, and I don't think we ever will. Despite a few creepy instances as a child, there has only been one time in my adult life that I have truly felt primal fear. My apology if it's a little bit long, but trust me, I am being as concise as possible and I need to explain the surroundings a little bit at first. I live in a village in the middle of the English countryside. To paint an accurate picture of its size, it has a population of 4,000, but feels more like 1,000 due to its spread out nature and being surrounded on all sides by lots of fields, farms, and woods that eventually connects into a pretty famous forest. It's kinda in the middle of nowhere, and because of this, it has notoriously bad phone and internet connections. But having lived here all my life, I know the place like the back of my hand. I know where all the public footpaths through the woods and fields are, where they connect, and which are shortcuts, and where to cross deep streams, etc. I have gone on walks in this area throughout my childhood with parents and alone as an adult. Nothing bad had happened. I felt safe here. This story takes place last summer in July after I moved back home from university. I had yet to get a job and I smoked a lot of weed back then, which was a habit my parents despised, and I tried to keep hidden from them by going on evening walks. Multiple pre-rolled joints hidden away in my hoodie pocket. As usual, this day they both got home at 5 p.m. We had dinner but chatted for a while longer than usual as my mom had quite a hectic day and she was telling me about it. Because of this, I ended up heading out for my walk about an hour later than routine, around 7 p.m. But as it was summer, the sun was still shining, so honestly, I didn't really notice that it would start getting dark while I was still out. The woodland closest to my house is less than 5 minutes away, and you enter through a gate into a farmer's field. You can see across the open area quite far until the first set of small woods obscures your view. That's where I was heading, as I knew this track takes under 2 hours and leads back onto the same path I was standing on now. More than enough time to smoke the 3 joints in my pocket, and for the smell to leave my clothing, I had thought. This entire area is very popular for dog walkers, so it's not unusual to see other people, and this is a village everybody says hello to everybody. I lit my first joint and started walking. I'm just in my own world for a while until I was less than 100 feet before the entrance to the woods. An elderly man was coming out of them, throwing a ball for his collie dog. I finished my joint and stubbed it out. As I got closer, I recognized it was John, who lived on the road next to mine and knew my grandpa. We stopped and said hello as I pet his dog Max. While talking, I see another man coming out of the woods. No dog, and he had a bright green jacket. He was very tall and had a good 10 years on me age-wise. Me and John chat for another minute and say goodbye, and he warns me not to stay out here too long as it will start getting dark soon. Which was true. The sky was bright pink and orange. The sun was indeed beginning to set, but I hadn't really noticed until he said something. I continued on down the path towards the man. When we were nearly passing each other, I look up to make brief eye contact, smile and say hello, just like everyone here does, even if you don't recognize the person. My eyes instantly met his. He was already looking at me. His dark eyes locked onto mine, but he wasn't smiling. I didn't know him at all, but I knew something was wrong. It was in his eyes. I swallowed my politeness and looked at the ground as we passed each other. I had lived in my uni city the past couple of years, so I knew a red flag when I saw one, and my country bumpkin manners evaporated. I quickened my pace a little, and before entering the woods I looked back. The guy was still walking in the same direction, following John. I felt relieved, and I laughed. Then I cursed the weed for making me paranoid, while lighting up another joint, and kept walking into the woods. It takes about 30 minutes to follow the path through the woods to the end. The pathway exit opened to another field that led to another set of woods. The sky was now violet, the dimming light having been obscured to me by the trees. I was already smoking my last joint and was near the entrance to the second set of the woods when I felt it. Fear, complete crippling, absolute fear, worked its way like electric through every layer of flesh. I'd never felt anything like it before, or since, but I knew what it was. Standing at the exit of the first set of woods was the man. I could still make out his green jacket in the fading light. I had looked back several times while in those trees, and he hadn't been there. For a second, I froze. As did he. He knew I'd seen. To sprint the distance between us would take him about 5 minutes. He was obviously in good shape, though. I threw the spliff, and I bolted into the woods, the only way I could go, and I didn't dare look behind me. I sprinted for a couple of minutes before taking a sharp left off the path into the trees, hoping to throw him off a little bit, but I couldn't see a thing. The light was already darkening, and the trees made it 100 times worse, especially as I was now in the thick of them. Their branches catching onto my clothes like fingers, whipping and scratching my bare legs so bad that I was bleeding. I just ran and ran with my lungs protesting in pain, hating me for smoking so much, while my heart was throwing itself against my ribcage, practically trying to escape. I couldn't fight anymore. I threw myself on the ground behind a thick trunk, my back against it, knees to my chest, hand thrown over my mouth to stifle my labored breathing, desperately trying to pump air into my lungs for the next sprint. I listened for the first time. A few seconds passed silently. Then I hear him. Heavy snapping twigs behind me, about 20 feet to my left. I dare not look in case he sees me. I have my phone, but I know I have a little chance of signal being where I was. And I knew he'd either hear me talking or see the light from the display. I'm not ashamed to say at this point I started to cry, the tears falling silently down my cheeks. "What the F?" I hear a deep voice exclaim. "Where are you? I know you are here. I saw you." I have to clasp both hands across my mouth to stop my scream from escaping. I can hear him moving around. I panic and I find enough courage to slowly peek from behind the tree. He was about 10 feet behind me, less than 20 feet to the left, with his back to me. I moved back and my eyes searched the area around me. I pick up a pretty heavy rock. I carefully check on him again, with his back still turned, but he's searching through the trees, hunched down lower to the ground now. I made a snap decision, and with everything I had left, I threw the rock behind me and to the right. It clattered through the branches of trees and made one hell of a noise. I watched him immediately bolt in its direction, and he starts laughing. I paused a little, hearing his footsteps get quieter until I thought I wouldn't be so visible to him if I moved and threw myself forward. I ran, trying to put as much distance between us as possible, but I was also aware that I was getting further and further away from home. I knew there had to be a stream somewhere close. If I found the stream, I could follow it as it borders the land and runs parallel to some of the footpaths. I ran and ran and ran until the trees finally cleared and I could just make out another field through them on the other side. I thank God and push myself a little bit further till I'm out of the trees and the ground disappears from below my feet and I go head over shoulders down the stream embankment. I crashed into the water below, my open mouth and lungs filling with muddy water. As I splutter it out, I feel both relieved to have found the stream and terrified he's heard me. My phone is also now ruined. I slowly make my way downstream as quiet as possible, listening out for him the whole time as the stream borders the woods, looking up periodically just in case. After a while, maybe half an hour, I notice the trees begin to thin out and realize this is the edge of the woods where I would have been exiting and where the pathway connected to the original one I started on. If I ran, I could probably get home in less than 20 minutes. But as quiet as I could, I dragged myself on my stomach, back up the embankment, army style, wanting to stay as low as possible. I peeked over the top. I could just make out the opening of the woods exit path about 50 feet away. I sat and scanned the forest line for a couple of minutes, my eyes trying to make out movement despite it now being pitch black. Nothing. I couldn't hear anything. I pushed myself up and sprinted as fast as I could across the field onto the pathway. I knew the gate I'd entered through was in the adjoining field, It really wasn't far. I was so happy. "You effing bitch," came a screech from across the field. I swear my legs nearly gave out right then and there. He had been waiting for me. I turned my head and saw him sprinting out of the woods at full sprint. I screamed and pushed myself further with tears coating my face. All I could do was run. I crossed into the main field now and I could see the moonlight shining off the metal gate. My house was just 5 minutes away after that. He was faster than me and getting closer, screaming at me the whole time about how he was going to slit my throat. I ran and ran, just pushing myself up and over the gate, and I ran up to the road. I dared look as I made the turn for my road. He was still following me. I raced up my driveway and threw myself through the door, running into the living room, crying and screaming hysterically, pointing behind me at the door. My dad ran outside while my mom grabbed a hold of me as I collapsed. As it turns out, my parents had already called the police. As I said, I was going out for an hour or so at 7 and it was now past 12 a.m. and I hadn't answered when they had called my now broken phone, which is very unlike me. We called the police again to explain, and they came and I gave a full statement. Both my parents and the police were horrified. Nothing like this ever happens here. There hasn't been a reported rape or murder in the last 100 years. But one look at me and it was obvious I was telling the truth. I was covered head to toes in cuts and bruises, soaking wet and covered in mud and blood. I won't go into how this experience changed me, because it's depressing, but I will say the thing that scares me the most is that they never had a suspect. Despite him following me so closely, he was gone by the time my dad ran outside. This story takes place when I was 16, 17 years old. I lived with just my dad in a little apartment in a questionable area. It was the type of area you'd not want to be out and about when the sun goes down. Up until a certain time, like 10 to 11 p.m., there would be a cop or two in the area, patrolling and making sure there are no gang-related activities going on. I had a job at a restaurant in the city, which was about a 30-minute car ride and an hour-and-a-half train ride. The train was a couple of blocks away from my place, and since my dad was always too lazy or hungover to drive me, that was my main form of transportation. I went to work around 3 p.m. and would usually get home around 12 or 1 a.m. This was my schedule 4 days a week, aside from having school. I would see a lot of familiar faces on the train because of this, but we never really made conversation with each other. Until one night when I got out of work late because some assholes wanted to sit in the restaurant past closing. Thanks to them, I missed my train. The next one wasn't scheduled to arrive for another hour, so having nowhere to go and no money for Lyft or Uber, I sat there waiting. No one was around me, so when this older man showed up, kind of staggering a bit, I assumed he was another drunken hobo in the city, trying to catch a train to sleep in. Something about his face gave me deja vu, but I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I've just seen him on the train here and there. He made his way over to me, much to my discomfort, and started up a conversation. He wasn't slurring, but by the way he was looking down at me gave me goosebumps. He asked me why I was out there so late, all by myself. I had to reply because I didn't want to anger him. I mean, after all, we were alone and he was close enough to pull out a knife or something. Anyway, I told him I was waiting for the train and he asked which one. Now, the train was color-coded with a strip at the top to indicate whether it goes north, south, east, or west. But I took blue. I also lied and said I took green. He looked at the schedule above the benches and saw that the green train was coming in 15 minutes, so he said he'd keep me company. For those extremely long 15 minutes, he asked how long I had been working at So-So Restaurant. This made my blood run ice cold. I never told him where I worked. I just looked at him and very timidly answered, "For a year," and he laughed. He said, "Wow, it's already been a whole year, huh?" At this point, my skin was itching out of anxiety, and as soon as the green train came, I knew I had no choice but to take it. I said goodbye to him and thanked him for the chat, hoping that would be the end of it. He suddenly told me that he took the green train too. So he followed me on and sat in a seat behind me. My mind was racing about whether he was going to try and do something to me, like chloroform me or hurt me some other way. But we rode the train in silence. I was trying to figure out how I was going to lose him. There weren't many people riding that train at that hour. Our ride was practically empty, unfortunately. As the ride went on in menacing silence, I could feel him staring down the back of my head. I waited until we got to a stop where there was another person, and I was just relieved to see a woman sitting there. She wasn't boarding though, so I immediately got off the train and the man followed me, just as I expected. I took a seat on a bench next to hers, close enough for her to see and hear everything that was going on, hoping that she would catch on. The man noticed that I was sniffling because of allergies and being out in the cold, and he asked if I was sick. I told him no, but he insisted on giving me these weird pills he had that were supposedly cold medicine. I declined in a louder voice. Sorry, I don't accept pills from strangers. This prompted the lady to look at us, and I made eye contact with her. She knew now. This went on until a blue train came and the lady got up, giving me a look that told me to get on with her. So without explanation, I did. She waved me over to sit next to her, and when the man tried to follow, she said, "No, you are going to sit over there," and made him sit a couple of seats across from us. He chose the one where he could face us and stared at me the entire time. I was shaking and about to burst into tears. The woman leaned over and whispered to me that she had a pistol. I felt much safer with her there. We whispered back and forth about what happened. I told her where I lived and how I was worried he would follow me home. She told me a friend of hers would be boarding the train soon, and when he did, she told me his name was Ray. Ray was filled in about everything and agreed to escort me home. She promised me that I could trust him. The two of them waited with me until I got to my stop. The man, still watching me, started to smile widely. He shouted, "This is your place, right?" To which I didn't respond and just gave the woman a hug and thanked her. Ray and I hurriedly hopped off the train, and as I looked back, I saw that the woman had pulled out her pistol and told the man to sit down, even blocking the exit with her body. I finally let myself cry in relief. Ray walked me home and tried to calm me down by telling me about his job and his family. After watching me get inside the gates of my apartment safely, I thanked him for his help. It chills me to think about how that night would have turned out if I hadn't met up with that woman and her friend. I feel extremely lucky to this day. I never saw that man again, and eventually I stopped thinking about him, but in the back of my head, that creepy, aroused smile of him was burning into my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder just what else he knew about me. I work at a gas station in the backwoods of Tennessee, and that's where this happened. Last night when I clocked in at 8, the store was completely dead. I figured it was going to be a pretty easy night because the road the station is on is not the main road. It used to be up until about a decade ago when a new freeway was built. This led basically every business that was here to pack up and leave their old building abandoned. Thanks to this, there are a lot of abandoned buildings on this stretch of road that local druggies tend to claim as their own. Anyways, around 11, I only had an hour left of my shift, and so I figured I should actually get some work done, instead of just sitting around and doing nothing. I'm 18, and so I work the shift alone, which is nice, because it means I can do pretty much whatever I want. This is normally pretty great because I can do whatever I want, so long as I get what I need to get done finished. I noticed we were out of barbecue chips, so I needed to go get them from our storage space, which is for some reason in the basement of the gas station. I've always hated going down there just because it gives me the creeps. Why the owner decided to store everything down there is beyond my comprehension. I got about halfway down the steps before something fell on the other side of the room, and it sounded like footsteps were coming my way. I sprinted up the stairs and locked the door to the basement, panicking like a madman the entire time. When I got back upstairs, I went behind the counter to the store computer so I could check the security cameras. I flicked over to the one that looked in the basement, and there was this guy just standing there, smiling up into the camera. He had a look of absolute insanity in his eyes, but he didn't look like the average junkie in the area. He He was surprisingly clean-shaven and dressed in what looked to be jeans and a button-up of some kind. Honestly, if he had walked into the store, I wouldn't have batted an eye, but because he was down there and was just looking into the camera smiling, it shook me to my core. I called the store owner, and at first he was pretty mad I called him this late at night, but once he heard how freaked out I was, his tone changed. He told me he'd be there in 15 minutes and just to lock the main door and make sure the man didn't go anywhere. I asked if I should call the police, but for some reason he didn't want me to do that just yet. I locked the entrance to the gas station and went back to looking at the man. He was still there, just smiling at me. About 3 minutes or so of him staring at me later, and he walked out of view of the camera. My boss showed up soon after with a shotgun, and when I let him in, he immediately went to the basement. I went with him just because I felt safe being with another person, but we found nothing. My boss ultimately chalked this up to me being tired and hallucinating the man, but I know what I saw. I just don't know how he escaped. This has me scared shitless as I clock back into work in a few hours, and I'm really dreading it. When I was younger, every year for Christmas, I would drive upstate to my aunt's house along a stretch of highway. I cannot for the life of me remember the name of this road. All I know is it runs nearby Akron, New York at some point. However, most of the drive is through rural areas with little to no towns nearby. So it was the dead of night, and my groggy self had gotten off a long shift and had to drag my ass to my aunt's house, since my extended family was expecting me the following morning. Near halfway through the drive, I realized I was low on gas, which irritated me. My brother told me he had filled it up the day before, so he either forgot or was straight up lying. I saw an archaic-looking sign for a gas station off the next road. It wasn't an official road sign. Literally a pole with a slab of metal attached with gas off of next exit, or something along those lines painted on. That seemed a little sketchy, but people do the same thing with fruit stands on highways, so whatever. I pulled off the next exit on some dilapidated country-ass road through the dense woods. The whole thing was creepy and surreal. I kept expecting Leatherface to come running out of the trees with the chainsaw. Anyways, eventually I came to the gas station and realized quickly it hadn't been open for years. It was all rusted and the convenience store's roof was caving in. The gas pumps had been all taken out as well. I pulled over next to it and checked my gauge. I would probably only make it another half mile before running out, so I called AAA and they said they'd send a truck over. Now it was just the waiting game. I left my engine on because when the headlights were off, everything was pitch black, and my paranoid self wasn't sitting next to an abandoned gas station in the middle of a forest in complete darkness. So most of the wait went uneventful until I noticed movement around the side of the old store where my lights were pointed. I looked up but I didn't see anything, so I looked back down at my phone. Then over the sounds of the night, I hear someone yell, "Hey buddy, come here," in a demanding tone. I look up and I shit you not, there's a dude standing by the store looking towards me, illuminated by my headlights. He looked like a run-of-the-mill homeless guy. I was honestly spooked and figured he must have been squatting there. Still watching him, I rolled down my window and yelled something like, "Yeah, what's up?" Still mentally crapping myself. I had my foot ready to floor it out of there at the first sign of trouble. "You got any change?" "No, I don't, man, sorry," I said. I look up at him now. He has this kind of vacant expression and is standing stiff. Then I see more movement. There are multiple heads, about 20 or so, peeking around the trees beyond the man I'm talking to. I can't see them clearly at all, but they are definitely people. Literally just heads though, staring in my direction from around the trees. I see another guy beginning to walk from around the gas station, and then I turned around and sped off. I got as far away from that place as my tank could carry me, and I updated AAA on my location. The driver came over and filled me up, and I didn't say anything. But after he left, I wanted to call the cops, so I called the nearest town sheriff department. They said they'd send a trooper over there, and I gave them the location. When I got to my aunt's house, they called me back. Whoever was there was gone, but they could tell a large number of people had been living there for a while. Blankets, canned food, the usual. The whole situation still freaks me out, but frankly, I can consider myself lucky. I'll always have such a creepy story to tell.